Hello, and welcome to a DoneJS LA live stream. My name is Jason Lahara. I am joined in person with people, but I'm not going to turn my laptop. Could you guys say hello? Give a quick shout out. Yeah, thank you. Let me share my screen. We are present to everyone. Sweet. So tonight, we're going to learn how to build this login and sign up form. So there will be a little sign up button, and we can put in whatever credentials that we want to create an account. It'll greet us. Then there's a logout button for signing out. And then if we want to log in again, we'll click on the login button and get a form for that. If we give the same credentials, we can log in. Or if we give bad credentials, we'll get a little error from the quote unquote server saying, hey, you're not authorized, or you need to try again. Cool. So that's going to be the app. Before we get into it, I want to thank our sponsors. So first off, Toby is the company that I work for. Toby, we can help you create amazing applications. We're a front-end consultancy here. We focus on front-end development, but we do all sorts of development. So two parts to that. We have a awesome design UX team that our model is to work with companies to figure out their actual business problems and how we can solve those. And then from that drives the design process and actually creating a good user experience and what have you. And then on the development side, building maintainable applications. Most of the companies that we work with are companies that we want to hand off development to in the long run. So we can get them started with a project, or we can do training and get their team up to speed with how to build maintainable applications. But in the long run, usually, we want to help teams grow so that they can be successful on their own. We've worked with a bunch of different clients. Go ahead and go to bitovi.com, check us out. There's a contact us in the upper right. If you contact us, give me a shout out. My name's Chasen. They'll know who I am. Second sponsor, I want to thank CodeSmith. Not so much for the live stream, but for everyone in person, we wouldn't be here without CodeSmith. So CodeSmith is a selective 12-week program teaching software engineering and machine learning. They've got this location in LA. There's a New York location and a Oxford University location. They specialize in getting people who already have a little bit of a software background, refining their skills, giving them expertise in computer science, in machine learning, in latest technologies for front-end and back-end development, the whole shebang. So if you're watching this, you're definitely interested in development. So go ahead and check them out, codesmith.io. Contact them. They won't know who I am. Go ahead, give me a shout out if you want to, but they won't know who I am. Cool. That's it for sponsors. Let's get into it. So we're gonna build this sign up and login form with a framework called CanJS. It's client-side JavaScript framework for building rich web interfaces. So you can think of it as similar to React, Vue, Angular, Ember. There's a million of them. We've been doing this for almost 11 years, I think. CanJS came from a framework called JavaScript in BC, and we rebranded a number of years ago. So we've been refining these tools for building client-side JavaScript applications for a long time. The fundamentals, though, are really simple. So we're going to run through those real quick. Here's an example of make this larger. Here's an example of a really simple app. It shows a count, and it has a button for increasing the count. This entire application is these 23 lines of code. Doc type, HTML, MyCounter. So we're creating a custom element called MyCounter. And so when MyCounter appears anywhere in a page, it'll create a new instance of what we call a component. So first, we import components from our CDN. Component is like the main thing for creating custom elements in CanJS. we give it a bunch of options. So say, okay, whenever you find the MyCounter tag, go ahead and replace it with this. What does it replace it with? This view. So this is just a template literal, so we can have multiple lines. You'll notice this is similar to handlebars. It's similar to mustache. We call it CAN stash, like CanJS stash. So anywhere where there's the double curlies, that will replace whatever is in here with whatever is defined in the view model. We'll get to that. And then whenever we have this on colon syntax, this is for listening to events. So we can listen to whatever kind of events that we want to. Click, mouse over, double click. We went through pointer events at the last meetup. You know, whatever native DOM events you want to listen to, the on colon syntax is that. And then you tell it, okay, what do you want called when that event happens? So in this case, we're going to call the increment function in our view model. That brings us to the last part, a view model. So this is the model for the view. This is what backs what's rendered in the stash template. So it has some special syntax for defining properties. Here we have a count property that's initial or default value is 0, and then we can define whatever other methods that we want to in our view model as well. So here we're defining an increment method. This is just standard ES6 syntax. So when increment gets called, we say this.count ++. We're incrementing count by 1. You'll notice that there are like, this is just plain JavaScript. There is no like set states. There is no you know, this dot set, you know, count and then the number that we want set to. We're just using kind of plain JavaScript to modify the properties in the view model, and then when that happens, it'll immediately update our view. You'll also notice how like I highlighted this. Actually, I'll just show you the DOM because that's way more interesting. You'll notice that when I increase the count, see how the span and the number is being highlighted in the inspector in the DevTools. So when something changes in this view, just the thing that is being modified in the view will be re-rendered in the DOM. So there's no re-rendering of the entire view. It's not being like this whole element isn't being replaced and then reinserted. Just the observable thing that changed is going to update the DOM. So when we're increasing the count, the only thing in the view that references the count is the span, which is why we see it updated. Yeah, question.
Are you part of the team that updates the CDN on line 7?
On line 7.
Like just
import it. So I'm part of the core team that works on these projects, works on CanJS and our other open source projects. So yeah, when we publish new versions, they get actually like unpackage is awesome because they automatically get stuff from NPM. So as soon as you publish something to NPM, it's available on a CDN like unpackage. And that's another thing too. You can use NPM to install CanJS or whatever. I love this because this is just using the like native, like what's in the browser. There's no module loading. You can get started with like just an import statement. You can do the same thing in your projects too. But of course you can install CAN with NPM and then import it into a project with Webpack or Steel or Browserify or whatever the flavor of the day is. Good question. I think that's it for my spiel about CanJS. I think the cool things are you create these custom elements, you define them with a component.extends. So whenever one of these elements is in the page, CanJS will take over and render that component. You have a view that's using the stash syntax for double curlies and then the event listeners like this. And then you have a view model that gets created for every instance of the custom element. And there you can define properties, you can define methods, you can do whatever you want in the view model to provide stuff for your view. Any questions? We're gonna really get into this in like just a minute, but that's kind of the high level overview. Questions?
What is NJX package?
What is the CanJS package?
Yes,
It's CAN. So if you go to npmjs.com/package/CAN, or if you npm install CAN, that's the main package.
Okay.
Good question. Anyone else? All right, let's get into it. So if you will, with your laptops, please go to canjs.com. And once you're there, you'll see on the left-hand side, there's a guides link in the navigation. You're going to click on that, and then you'll scroll down to the recipes section. There's a ton of different guides that we have published on the site. Tonight, we're going to go through the sign up and login one. Give everyone a minute to pull out their laptop. If you're already on the sign up and login one, you'll notice right at the top, there's two CodePens. There's one with the finished result. Don't look at that. Scroll past that, and then you'll see the one with some less and some JavaScript. And then click on the Edit on CodePen button. That'll open a new tab, a new window with the starter CodePen. And you'll notice it just has some CSS and some starter JS, and we'll go through that.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What is the Wi-Fi password?
Oh, yeah, sorry. It is, the network is CodeSmith, and the password is I love testing, all lowercase, all one word. Yeah, if you can see that. I love testing.
Oh, okay.
Because we all love testing. We all should love testing.
Yeah, we should. That's in development. That we should do.
Cool. When you go to canjs.com, click on guides, scroll down to the recipe section, and then click the sign up and login guide. When you're there, could you raise your hand for me?
After the after the recipe, what else should I?
Scroll down to the sign up and login and click that on the left-hand side under recipes. And then that'll land you on a page like this.
Okay.
Cool. And then scroll down. So there's two CodePens at the top. There's this finished one. We do not want that one. We want to click on the we want to click the Edit on CodePen button that's on the second one that has the less in the JavaScript. You'll know you're on the right one because when you click on the Edit on CodePen button, it'll be just a vast purple space with nothing else rendered, just purple. So click on the second CodePen, click on the Edit on CodePen button in the upper right of that one. That should open a new window or new tab or what have you. Okay, everyone there?
Nope.
Okay. Where are you right now?
So it looks like I have to sign up first. Open, sign up and log in. Good. That is, but that's not. That's not. Go back to the desktop. I totally just Googled it and went straight there.
Oh, okay. So I'd go to the CanJS guide and then scroll up. Yeah. So scroll down a little bit. And go to the second one and click on that Edit on CodePen.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Yep. I have no idea what comes up on Google when you when you search for it. Okay, cool. I think everyone's good to go. I'm gonna talk a little bit about what is in this CodePen to start off. So the CSS, we've got some styles in there. I'm not going to talk about those. You can explore those if you want to on your own, but those are just going to give us a basis for creating a semi-decent looking app. And then the JavaScript, though, I definitely want to talk about this. So first off, we have the import statement at the top. That's the same thing that we saw on the homepage. You'll notice there's 3 imports, though. We're also importing an Ajax module and a fixture module. The Ajax module is just an easy helper for making XML HTTP requests, making Ajax requests. And then fixture is CAN Fixture. It's for intercepting Ajax requests and then responding with your own response. Who has used something like fixtures before? Okay, awesome. Honestly, I love fixtures so much. I think they're so awesome. I'm happy to spread the word. So let's go through these. So here's an example of a fixture where anytime a GET request to /API/session is made, this function will run with the request that's being made. So the headers, the data that's being sent, the query parameters, everything is going to be available in request. And then a response callback is given so you can respond with whatever you want to. So in this example, this API endpoint is for determining whether or not there's currently a login session. In our example tonight, we're not going to be working with an actual like backend API or database or anything like that. We're going to be relying on these fixtures so that when we make requests, the fixtures are going to respond, kind of simulating that they actually were communicating with an API. So in this one, we're going to use local storage as a way of storing like users that have signed in, if there's currently a session, if they're currently logged in, and that sort of thing. So in this fixture for determining if there's a session, we're checking something in local storage, and then if the user is logged in, we're calling that response callback with the session data that we got from local storage. Otherwise, we're responding with the HTTP status code 404, not found. We're saying couldn't find the session with this payload saying there's no session. And then I think this is that header? I'm not sure what this 4th argument is. So you had a question actually. Yeah.
Could you repeat that about what the fixtures are? Is it similar to like what Postman is, or like Axios?
It's been a few years since I've used Postman. I think Axios is a library for making requests. Is that right? Okay, cool. So fixtures are like on the opposite end of that. So you could use Axios or Fetch or the XML HTTP request object. There's a bunch of ways of making API calls, and then this fixture module is going to intercept any Ajax calls and then let you configure a response. So that request is never going to actually like go across the network. If they're basically, when you set up a fixture, if it matches the pattern that you give the fixture module, then it'll let you control the response. So that's why I say like you would use Axios, or in this case, we're going to be using a module, a CAN Ajax module for making the requests, and then fixtures are going to essentially like capture that request and control what gets responded with. So it doesn't actually like hit a server.
So fixtures is pretty much like simulating the backend.
Yeah, exactly. I love them so much because from fixtures, you can, like I use fixtures for writing tests So you don't actually have to have a backend set up. You can set up a fixture to respond with whatever data you need to, so you can put your application in different states for testing. I love creating demo pages. So instead of having to boot up the app to a very specific point to like work on a component or whatever, if you create a demo page that just has that component and then you have fixtures, so you're not even working with the database, like to me that is a really good development setup.
It's really easy to just like set up something kind of and just like show, like present something, not have to actually build out full stack app.
Is it never used in production? This is strictly testing. Correct.
So yeah, you wouldn't use it in like you wouldn't want to use it in production, because then hopefully like you have your backend API that's actually responding with data. But it also means that you can like start working on the front end for something before the backend API has even been set up. If you're a one-man team and you're working on a project, that means you can invest fully in whatever, like figuring out the UI for something and then building fixtures out of it. And then when you're done, be like, okay, now I know what the API for this should be, right? And then, you know, go build the API. So like super flexible way of doing development. Cool. I'm going to go through the other ones just real quick. So for the signup form, we're going to have this API users endpoint that we have a fixture for. So for this one, we're going to, you'll notice request.data.email. So this is saying when we want to make an API call to create a new user, we're going to send an object that has an email property with whatever email they're signing up with. And that's what this like request.data, that's what the fixture is using to capture what the email is. So from that, we create a like session object. And then because we're just mocking things in the browser, because we don't have a backend API, that's where we're using local storage. So we use local storage to like essentially set an item that is the user and set an item that is the session. Who's used the local storage API before? Okay, cool. So local storage is awesome. So we're all familiar with like what cookies are. Like okay. So cookies are like a way to, like, you store data, and then whenever you make you store data that's associated with a like an HTTP endpoint. So you like create cookies that are for, you know, CodePen.io, so that whenever you make a request to CodePen.io, your cookies are sent to that domain, so the server can do you know, whatever logic it needs to. This is frequently used for like signing in for places. So when you fill out a sign-in form, usually that submits to a server, and then that creates it, you know, responds with a cookie, and a cookie gets set in your browser so that any subsequent requests have that cookie to identify that you're that user.
So in this case, local storage is a cookie?
So local storage is a different API that lets you store things in the browser that aren't sent to the server when you make requests. So this is handy for us because we want to be able to just store some data that still is saved when we refresh the browser, that we're not getting from the server and we're not sending to the server. So that's like a quick overview of the local storage API. We're not going to get into it too deeply because it's just used by these fixtures, but definitely check it out. So that's how we're gonna save our user in our session. The last couple of fixtures. So when a delete call is made to our API/session endpoint, we're gonna delete the session from our local storage. And then the last one is when, thanks. Our last one is when we when we want to create a new session, when we want to sign in a user, we're going to make a post request to /API/session. And then this has all of the logic. I'm not going to go through all of this, but this essentially has the logic for checking, has there already been a user registered with that email address and password? If there is, then we'll return the session data. Otherwise, we'll send back some error messages and saying they're not authorized, right? They're not signed up for the service, or they are signed up, but the password's wrong. Usually you want to send the same response for both of those, because you don't want people to be able to determine if a specific user is signed up for a specific service. That's not mission critical for every application, right? But for maybe more sensitive websites where just knowing that someone is signed up for it reveals information about that person, you'd want to respond with the same error message. Does that make sense? Cool. Yeah, so those are the fixtures that are already set up for us. We're not going to touch those anymore, but definitely check out CAN Fixture. So all of the CanJS packages are all individual modules. So you can use CAN Fixture in an app with Vue or React or Angular, or just a vanilla JavaScript app. So definitely check out CAN Fixture for any projects. Cool. So if you will, with me, scroll from the CodePen that we opened. We're going to scroll right past this understanding the service API section because we just went through that. And we'll go down to the setup section. So the way tonight is going to work is together, we're going to talk about the next step that we want to take on in building up the app. That's the problem. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about everything that you need to know to actually do that step. And then I'll let you guys run wild for a few minutes to try and hack up a solution. And then we'll go through a solution together. So that's kind of how we'll go through each section. So to start off, what we want is we've got this blank canvas where nothing is being rendered. What we want to do is we want to create a sign up login custom element. So when someone adds this to an HTML page, they get this rendered. They get this paragraph and this form rendered in the page, and they can see that. So what do we need to know? Well, this is going to be a refresher of the stuff that we went through on the homepage, because there's just those few principles. So we're going to call component.extend and give it a few options, one of which is going to be the tag. And then we can say that this custom element is going to be called sign up login. And then we want to give a view option, which can be a string or a template literal. And then we can put whatever we want inside of that custom element, we can put in the view. And then we don't need to add this right now, but go ahead and add this view model property. We're not doing anything dynamic in here, right? This is just plain HTML, but we are going to add some dynamic stuff. So I think that's it. I'll give you guys a couple minutes to do this on your own. The goal is when you have sign up login in your HTML, that this gets rendered with a custom element. And I'm going to point out something that you should definitely use. So when you hover over any of these code examples, there's a copy button in the upper right that'll copy the whole code block. So feel free to make use of that. Cool. I'll give you guys a couple minutes. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have questions or you want to talk about anything. Happy to answer questions. Raise your hands when you feel like you've come to a solution. Cool. Everyone else, do you want a couple more minutes, or should we go through a solution together? Cool. All right. Who wants to get me started? What's step one? There is no specific order that you have to go through, but what was someone's step one?
Creating an element in HTML.
Okay, cool. So in here, we're gonna have a sign up login element. Cool. Step two, anyone? What should we do next?
In your JS, you want to extend your component.
Yeah, let's do that. So I'm going to add that at the bottom. Component.extend. We're going to give it some options. First, we're going to have the same tag that we had in our HTML. Our second will be the string literal or template literal, and then we'll go ahead and add a viewModel thing that we'll add later. I think our last thing is I'm gonna use this copy button and go ahead and put all of this into the view here and format it a little bit nicely. Sweet. All right. So now we have we've got our sign up login custom element defined. We have it. We're using it in our HTML, and then it's rendering the view that we had. Cool.
But what exactly is component.extend?
So so components comes from this import up here, and then this. So this unpackage.com/can5/ all of this. So this. Point this out real quick. So this is returning the entire like CanJS core libraries. So there's lots of different packages that kind of make up CanJS. CAN component is the one for creating custom elements. We've talked about CAN Fixture for like mocking the responses for Ajax calls. There's this Ajax module for making Ajax calls. There's a bunch of different packages that are all part of CanJS. If you were to go to canjs.com and let me bump this up. If you were to go to canjs.com and look at the API docs, you can see there's a bunch of different modules. So that component that we're importing is this CAN component module.
Okay. The functionality is what I was most hover. It's going to show up the HTML.
Sorry, say that again.
So the point for this activity is whatever is most handed over, this HTML shows up.
Yes, exactly. So now, if we inspect the DOM, let me open up this in a new window. So when we inspect the DOM, you'll notice. So this is the sign up login custom element that we have in our HTML tab. Oh, that's not what I want. Oh, okay. Let's close this. So this is the custom element that we put in the HTML tab in CodePen. And then whenever a custom element is, whenever that tag is in the HTML, once you call component.extend, CanJS will look for that custom element, or if that element is ever added, then it'll take over and render whatever is inside the view in that custom element. So that's how we get from having this here to having this DOM rendered. Does that make a little more sense?
I have no idea you can use React with HTML.
So React is a so React has JSX, which is not HTML. It kind of looks like HTML, but it's not HTML. Similarly, in CanJS, this view, this is using a language called Stash or CAN Stash, which you can put plain HTML in there and it'll render it. We're going to customize it with those double curlies and such. Probably next, we're going to add some customization so that we can change what's rendered in the view.
So you called component.extend.
Yep.
Did you then add the rest of the code below it, or was that already in the code and we just needed to link it via the extend call?
So I copied this view from this page.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would definitely use the guide page to your advantage in like referring to stuff. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions before we move on? And I'll say, so at the end of all of these sections, there is a the solution section. I'm always going to copy all of the code from there and replace what's in the JavaScript tag. So just delete whatever you have, paste in what you copy from the solution, and then we'll all be on the same page going forward. So I'm going to do that too, because I'm sure as we're hacking on stuff, there'll be minor differences between how we name stuff or whatever. So cool. Next section. So right now we have, excuse me. So right now we have this paragraph, this welcome message, and then we have our sign up form, right? So the next thing that I think we should do is we should check if there is a session for the user. And if there is, then we want to go ahead and show them this paragraph. But if there isn't, then we should show them the sign up form, right? So we're going to check so our next step is to check if the user is logged in. So let me make this a little bit larger. So the problem. So we want to make a request. We want to make a GET request to /API//session to figure out if there is currently a session. And then if there is, then we're going to show that welcome paragraph, and if there isn't, we'll show the sign up form. We want to do this by keeping the session data in a promise and defining a session promise property. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, we said that we added that view model property because we were going to add stuff later. Now is the time where we're going to add stuff. So we can define a property by adding a property to this view model object, and then setting it as an object that has all of the configuration that we need. There's a bunch of different options. To start off with, we'll look at this default function. So if we define a property and then we have a default property in its definition that is a function, we can return whatever we want, and that is going to be the initial or the default value for this property. So in this example, we have our components, we have the view model, and the my property is going to be this string by default. So when we render it in our template, we do the double curlies, and we can do this.myProperty. This always refers to the instance of the view model. Just like in JavaScript, like if we were writing this function, we could do this dot whatever. So we'll do this.myProperty, and this will render this string because it's accessing this property, and it's the thing that's returned from the default function is that string. My explanation might have been a little bit confusing. Any questions about that? No? Okay.
Where is for the this.myProperty, it's referring to the view model and not the component?
So they're almost one and the same. Like there's the component elements, and then it's view model. And so in basically in our view, this will always refer to the view model instance. Yeah, inside here, we're not gonna be referring to the component element. Good question. Cool. So this is how we can define properties in our view model. And then second thing we need to know is that Ajax module that we imported. You could just make an XML, HTTP request, whatever. This is just an easy way of making an Ajax call. So you call Ajax, you give it some configuration. One of the properties is the URL that you want to call. So I think the one that we want to call is /API/session. That returns a promise, which is what we want. Third thing is we can do conditionals in Stash with this double curlies and then hash symbol. So we do double curlies, hash, if, and then anything in there to check for if something is true. And then you can also do else and end if in your Stash template. So this is very similar to, this is basically the same as handlebars and mustache, how those languages work.
Is the possible CanJS?
So that's a common thing in mustache and handlebars. So those templating languages have been around for years. So this is basically the same syntax. Or it's similar syntax. So yeah. So but yes, you're right that this is, so the double curlies basically anywhere in the template are saying, wait, I'm gonna do some logic, or I'm gonna render something in here, and then the pound if is one of the different helpers. So if is one of many. There's EQ for equality. There's let, not, switch, case. There's a bunch of different helpers for loops. So if is one of those. For now, we just need to know about if. So we can check if a property is true. And then the last thing is that this is I think a really cool thing about Stash. So if you worked with promises before, you know that you can't, if you have a promise, you can't get its value without doing .then and then defining a callback function. There's no way to have the promise variable and then get the value from it. You always have to call .then and then you can get the value. In Stash, this is not true. There's no async function that you have to define. So any promise, it has these 5 properties on it. So you can just get its value by saying .value, or you can check if it's pending, resolved, rejected with these, which you can't do with promises normally. And there's also a reason property. So when it's rejected, .reason will have the error message or whatever the error is will be the reason. So that makes templating with the syntax much easier. That was a lot. Those are all the parts that you need to know. So again, what we want to do is so the main things that we want to do is we want to make a request to /API/session. When we can do that by using the CAN Ajax. We can use this module. And then in our template, we basically want to show this if there is a session, or we want to show the signup form if there is not yet a session. So I'm going to let you guys have some time on your own. Go ahead and use this. Everyone hopefully has this page open. If not, open this page and use it for reference for all of these different parts. I'll give you guys some time on your own to figure out a solution, and then we'll go through a solution together. If you have questions, if you're confused, if you want to see if you're on the right track, raise your hand. I'm happy to help.
Question.
Yeah.
This doesn't really look correct.
Sorry, say that again?
So, I think this is.
Oh, okay, so you're close. Okay, so this view is going to be it's going to be a template literal. Have you worked with this? Have you seen this syntax before? Yeah, so yeah, that is something that you can put in a template literal to like, have variables to replace. So you're almost there. Just copy paste this HTML into that template level. Down to the form. Yep. Yeah, so cut that and then put it in that view. Yep, exactly. So it should, I think it will just rerun on its own. So I think this is.
I don't think this is good, right? Because I'm trying to use the CSS to do the hover stuff, I don't know that. So.
Okay. What you could do is go back to the guide and then scroll up. Yeah, so we want this. So click that copy button. Just to make sure we're starting from a good set. Yeah, okay. Is it click? Okay, there we go. Go here, select everything in there, and then delete it. We'll just make sure that we're starting from that. Okay, so this should be right. Okay, so now you should be able to modify to your content. So yeah, basically what's happening here when we have that view of the template level. So CanJS is parsing this, and when it parses it, it'll look for double curlies. So anywhere where there's double curlies, it will do some special logic, which is how we can go from this plain HTML, and then for this part of the exercise, using the double curlies, CanJS will parse that. So that's all being done within within that template.
So this will be exactly that.
So that template literal view will be rendered with an instance of this view model. So essentially, whenever it encounters a custom element like that, it'll create a new instance. Like it creates a new element, and then it creates a new instance of the model, and then renders this view with whatever this model.
Okay. Can you give me some direction in terms of what should I do next?
Yeah, so next, so I think so you could approach it a few different ways. So in the column, we need to change what's, we need to render either the like welcome someone paragraph, or we want to render the form. So you could put something in your view model to choose which one to render. Or you could start by changing the view with this syntax, so it's showing either one thing or the other. There's a few places that you can start.
And how is that corresponding to the index?
So what we want to do, we want to define a view model, and by default, we want to return let's return what the destination is called. Because if we like here, we're returning a string, and then we can enter it. What we want to do is we want to return this so that we can check if the promise is resolved and if there's a session. So if I would start by copying the property definition and then let's see the Ajax section.
This property is referring to this.
Yeah, so this in the view will also refer to the view model instance.
So it's calling the function, whatever I put here.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I ask you?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so how does the vModel property on this object work? So, it looks like we're adding, like the vModel is an object that contains a property that has a function that runs under what conditions?
Yeah, so
Like does this function like always run? Or
yes. So for this, where we have that default function, essentially the first time that my property is accessed, it'll run the default function to get its value. So if there was nothing in the template that referred to this .my property, or if there wasn't anything else in the view models that referred to it, it would never be running. Another way of thinking about it is all of the things in the view model, all of the properties that are defined, like they're just definitions until something starts to access them. So
okay.
the common thing in
so then if I access like the view model object with the key my property, it'll run the default function.
Yep.
Okay, and that's where I'm going to be putting the logic to decide what renders in the HTML, or
so there's kind of like two ways you can do it. You could have that logic in the view model, or you could do like there's some really basic logic that you can do in the
HTML,
in the
which is
template.
what we have there.
Yeah. So generally, what I do is for really basic, like, if something's true, or if something is equal to something else.
Yeah,
or
check the promise object and see if that matches. Thing.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And then based on that, I would decide what to render.
Yep.
Okay. Then that would be sidestepping touching that function at all.
So so for this one, we still want to, we want to make that Ajax call.
Okay, yeah, so that would go, I assume, in that default function, and then I would call it.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then what would I be? Yeah, I've never done an Ajax call before.
Mm-hmm.
What would I be trying to? So like this URL is fairly. I assume we're just pulling data from some URL somewhere.
Yep.
But given that we don't have any, like a separate, like a database or anything, so where would I be looking for that? So the fixture, right, or something?
Exactly. So we have those fixtures set up to like mock those responses. So if you set up an Ajax call that goes to the /API/session, I think is the endpoint.
Oh, okay, so it's defined there.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. So if you make an Ajax call to that URL, then the fixture will respond.
Okay.
I can't remember exactly what that URL is, but I think it's defined within the within the session. I'm pretty sure it's the API session.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Cool.
I'll try doing some heading into that for a minute.
Yeah, sounds good. Anyone else? Questions? We'll give everyone a few more minutes and then we'll go through a solution together. All right, anyone feel like they have step one of a solution? Anyone want to get me started? All right. Yeah, go for it.
Well, we can set up the if-else statements.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So in our template, we... You guys okay? Oh, okay. I had a bag with trash. I don't know. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's just a trash bag, so. Okay. So you said we can do the conditionals. So we're gonna do something like.
Oh yeah. It's the season.
So we're gonna do something like double curlies if, and we can put whatever we want in here. then we do double curlies else, and double curlies and if. So this is like the basic structure of how we can do the if else in the template.
So the last line, the /if, does that exit out of the if else statements?
Yeah. Yeah, because you could have a bunch nested and all that jazz. Cool. Okay, so we have our if else. What did you put in here?
Session promise value.
Sorry, say that again.
That's session promise value.
Okay. What did you name your?
Session promise.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So in our case, if oh, you said dot value. So we're going to define a session promise property in our view model that will return the session promise, for lack of a better word. And then we noticed in our, like, what we need to know, there's there's these properties that we could use. So if we say this dot session promise dot value, this is saying if something was returned by the session promise call. So this will only be true when the promise is resolved, and then if there's a value that was returned. So in this case, we're going to say we're going to have the welcome message, and then the else case is going to be the signup form. Cool. So right now, with our component being rendered, we'll always see the signup form because we haven't defined a session promise property, right? So this will always be false. So right now we'll always see the signup form, but we can change that. I'm gonna copy session promise, and then we're gonna add this to our view model. So we do the property name and then an object, which is the definition for the property. And then we're going to use the default API to get started. So we'll say default. Default is a function, and then you can return whatever the default value should be. What do we want the default value to be for session promise?
Return the Ajax call.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to return the Ajax call. And then this one, oh boy. Let's close that. Okay. So there we go. We're going to return the Ajax call. So this Ajax, remember, is coming from what we imported. This is CAN Ajax that we imported at the top. The API is just like a URL, and then ours is API session, I think. So we can actually, let me show you that this is actually working. Okay, so let's actually run this one more time. Oh, not what I wanted. Oh, also not what I wanted. Sorry, guys. Everything's weird at this. Okay. All right, let's try that again. So what did we do down here? Okay, so what I wanted to point out is, so now that our template is referencing this session promise property of our view model, which means this default function is going to run. So when it does, you'll see that like CanJS puts some logs of what's going on. So you can see that the like get/API/session, this fixture is being called. We're getting a promise from CAN Ajax. CAN Fixture also logs like details about the response and what have you. So for us, we're responding with the like 404 no session because we haven't created a new session, right? We haven't made a like post API call to create a new session. So it's returning the fixture is returning a 404. And then that's why in our template, this just stays false because the session promise gets resolved, but it doesn't have a value. It was rejected. So like of these helpers, because the promise was rejected, it has a reason. We could actually like print out the error message from the API. Reason will be the error, the error response, and then it has that message property. So that's not what we want, but just kind of showing that. Yeah.
So then when we have it as dot value here, we can view that whole package in the console. Then it has the response body, it has the full.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that's just CAN Fixture logging those things. Cool. Any questions? All right. So scroll down to the solution, click on the copy button. So you'll see what's being added here. The same if this session promise value. Go ahead and delete everything in the JavaScript tab and then replace it with that. So we're all starting from the same template. Yeah, and this is exactly the same as what we wrote. Cool. Okay, so next step that we want to do is we want to actually make the signup form work, right? So we want to let the user enter an email and password, and then they're going to click. So they'll enter an email and password here. Then they'll click the sign up button. And then when this happens, we'll make a post to /API/users. And then once the user is created, we want to update the session promise property to have a promise with a session like object. Okay, so what this means is once we post, once we post to create the user, then we want to set the session promise property to be a promise with some data like this. The reason for that is if we look at our template, right, that's how we're deciding whether or not to show the welcome message or the signup form. So basically, when we create a new user, then we want to set this session property to something else that looks like a session, which is just an object like this. Let's go through what we need to know. Okay, so the first thing that we used a view model for was creating a property that had a default function. You can also define properties just with their name and the type that they should be. So for example, we can do email should be a string, or any other property that we want. And this is basically shorthand for an object that has the type defined like this. So this will just make sure that if email is set to any value other than null or undefined, it will be cast to a string. So if we said like this.email equals 100, it'd be 100 as a string instead of 100 as a number. The different types are like string, there's a number type, there's an any type. So whatever the value is set to, it can be anything. There's a few different types. So the thing that we care about right now is the string type. Cool. So you can define properties like that. So this is the binding syntax for binding to an element's value. So if we have an input, the thing on the left side is the property that we want to bind to. The thing on the right side of the colon is the direction of the binding. So CanJS has one-way and two-way bindings. You can just always set the value of something. You can always get the value from something, or you can two-way bind something. So changing one changes the other. In this case, we have these email and password inputs already. We want to add a binding to get the value of the input and set it to a value in our view model. So that's how in our template we can, the user enters whatever value they want in here, and then that'll be set to something in the view model. Questions about that? About the syntax? Okay. The second kind of binding syntax that we're going to use is this on listener syntax, or the on colon syntax. So whenever this event fires, we'll define something that we want to be called in our view model. So in this example, whenever the div is clicked, then it's going to run the do something function in our view model. This is a little special syntax for being able to access different things in the in the template. So an example is scope.event means whatever the event object is for the click, like whenever there's a click or a double click or a mouse over or whatever, a DOM event gets created. So this is scope.event will be whatever that DOM event is, and then pass it in to the function in our view model. So if we have a do something method on our view model, it'll be passed the click event with this syntax. Cool. To prevent a form from submitting, call event.preventDefault. So when you're building a form and user hits submit, the default action in the browser is to submit that form, like a URL encoded form, to the browser or to the server. We don't want that, right? Because that would just like submit the form data to whatever is serving the site. So that is not what we want to do. So we want to call event.preventDefault. So the browser doesn't do that behavior, and we can do our own special behavior, which is going to be to make an Ajax request. So similar to the one that we had before, we're going to make another one to /API/users, I think. And this time it's going to be a post. And then I think the last thing is that when you have a promise, you can call .then on it. That function is called when the promise is resolved. So when it succeeds, it wouldn't be called if the API responded with an error. So .then and then the success function. And then in here, we can do whatever logic that we want to. So I think in our example, we want to set session promise to be a session-like object. So what we can do in our .then function is return a session-like object, and then the promise's value will be whatever you return in the .then. That was a lot. I'll give you guys a few minutes. Please ask questions. Give you guys some time on your own. Again, so kind of to reiterate, so we want to, the big things are that we want to create the bindings on our inputs to store the email and password in our view model. We want to create a method in our view model so that when we submit the form, we call prevent default on the event, and then we create that Ajax request to create a new session. We have the post to /API/users, I think. And then the last thing is to return something that looks like a session. So we define that up here as like, this is a session-like object, and that's what we want returned in our .then. All right, I'll give you guys time on your own. Please raise your hands, ask questions.
fixture, please?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I was very lost. Based on what you just explained. I don't even know what question to ask.
Okay. So the let's that doesn't seem right. Let's select everything in here and go back to the guide and click on the so this is the solution for the section that we're doing right now. Yeah, this one. Yeah, so I'll do this one. There we go. Okay, so so now we always have the sign up form showing. So what I would do as a first step is, so when you do that, you notice how it flashed and it reloaded. That's the browser's default behavior, is to basically encode everything that's in that form and then send it to the server.
And they ask, what's captured the value here and where's the information sent?
Yep, that's what you want to do right now, is you want to go back to the go back to the page, the guide page. Yeah, whatever the last page. Yeah. So what we want to do is go in.
I want to ask, why is the URL it's section?
Because short answer is that's what we have defined in our fixture. That's like a fake. When you make a request to that URL, we have the fake fixture response set up for that URL.
It's as a post.
So this is a get by default. It's a get, but you could say type get. So in this part of the exercise, we're going to say type host to /API/users to create a new user. Remember, we create a new user, but it's just whatever that fixture is doing. Right? There's no backend API.
How come that those code is all here? Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, it just collapses all of the stuff that you had before. So it's not.
Okay. But for that condition, if else, like if welcome and else render this, how does this happen?
So you're talking about the if.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So how does it?
Welcome and the sign up form. How is that different? Because here you just said.
Right. Okay. So in our template we have the if and then the welcome, and then that is just the sign up form. If you scroll up, you know what? It might be easier if you change. So click on change view. It'll be easier. On this one. And click on this button. And then click on that's not this. That's nice. And then, yeah, it'll be easier to see the code. Okay, so this when the template is rendered, it's running the logic. Any logic within the double curlies, it's running that logic. So that's how it's saying if this session promise.value, it's looking on like this always refers to the V model, the instance of the V model that we created, or that we're defining model. Whenever it sees that this tag, will create a new instance of that V model, and then render this view with that instance. So when that happens, it creates a new instance and it renders this view. No, we don't, because it's accessing the session promise, and then it's making that Ajax call at the bottom. it's making that Ajax call because the session promises default value is that Ajax call. So it makes the Ajax call, and then there's no session, right? You haven't logged in. We haven't even built the login form, right? So it returns with an error. It returns with a not authorized error, and that's why there's no session pocket stuff. It's because it's returning with an error, and that's why it's only the signup form that's being ordered, because there's the if block, and the else block is signup.
It's not really clear because
It does exist. It is that Ajax call, but dot value doesn't. The dot value.
oh, okay, the value that we do that.
So that's going to be different from the session promise, right? Because we do have that session promise, but the dot value that refers to the promises results value. So there's like the promise that is fetching the data, and then it has in Stash it has special properties like dot value, which refers to the the success value that's returned from the server. In this case, so our fixture is responding with not authorized. It's responding with an error. So it's saying there is
There's
no
no error
session.
here.
No, there's no error here, but look, open up the console. So you'll notice it's logging that there's a failed promise. And then if you open up that object, you'll see that, or if you open up that is what the fixture is responding to. It's saying there is no session now.
I'm trying to get my foot.
So there is an error happening, we're just not showing it.
Can't stop that.
Okay.
That's weird.
What's the instructions that we do?
So the next thing that we want to do is we want to get values that are in the input, and then we want to set them on the model. So the way that we can do that is we'll define core properties and we'll define an email. Let's go ahead and do this. So in the view, so we could define an email. And then, and then our type is going to be let's do the same thing
that
for
one of an engineer or software engineer.
so it's going to be commas in here. So instead of semicolon, it's going to be equals a list of methods.
LinkedIn. We've been using also Glassdoor. I don't use Glassdoor. I only use like Glassdoor to see what people
Let's do string. We want them to be able to type in anything. And then click comma. And then the next thing to do is to do the binding syntax. But we'll do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
How you guys feeling? Yay? Nay? Yeah. All right. Let's go through a solution together. Who wants to get me started on step one? Anyone?
Establishing values for name and password, or what type data types.
Okay. What does that mean?
So we can specify whether the email and passwords are going to be strings or any.
Yeah, where do we want to do that?
Within the view model.
Awesome. Okay, so I had already started to add email. Let's add password too. So now we have these, the email and passwords, or password are going to be strings. What's step 2? It can be anyone. Go ahead.
We can write the signup function.
Okay. We'll just do that under here. Okay, so what is our signup function going to be like? What's in here?
Personally, we want the event form.
Good call. So that means we're going to need to pass in the event, and then we'll call prevent default. Without this, we'll get the browser's default behavior, which is to submit the form. Cool. What's next?
Like the Ajax request.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna have Ajax with the URL. This is API users, right? Okay. Type is going to be post, and then we're going to need to actually send it some data. So this, I think the data is email and password, and then how can we access the email and password?
This stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the same as in our template where it'll be this.email and password is this.password. Cool. Okay, so we have that. What's next? We can keep on doing stuff in here, or we can start updating our template. Choose your own adventure.
How comes you do not put this session promise in front of Ajax? Because that's what the solution.
That is what the solution. We can do that.
I mean, what's the difference? Because I don't understand syntax.
Yeah. So right now, when signup gets called, we're just making the Ajax request, but we're not storing that promise anywhere. But what we can do is we can say this .session promise is this Ajax call. But this means that session promise will be resolved with whatever this promise gets resolved with, which is not what we want. What we want is if this succeeds, then we want to return a session like, what did it say? A session like object. So we're going to return an object that has a user property that has the email. There's a couple of ways of doing this. I'm not sure what the guide shows. One way would be like create a variable. So const email is this.email. And then we can put that there, and then we can refer to it here as well. So now we have kind of botched the indentation of this. Don't know how to recover from that. Okay. So now session promise, it'll make the API/users request, and then the session promise value is going to be this object, because that's what we're returning from our .then. Basically, you can chain promises. You can keep on calling .then for as much as you want, and then whatever is returned by the last one will be the promises value. Cool. I think, are we missing anything else from this signup? call? I don't think so. Let's change our template. So we're going to add the binding syntax. So we're going to say for email, we're going to send the value to this.email. So this says whatever the input to value property is, set it to the view model this.email. We're going to do the same thing for password. So we're going to say value to, and then this.password. What else do we need to do? We need to, yeah, okay. So yeah, you said on submit, which I think is the better solution. I just want to give a quick call out. So you would kind of think, well, if the user clicks the button when we want to do an on click here of this dot sign up, why do you say submit instead of putting the on click on the button?
It would submit the whole form versus the that button. It would listen for the button click, whereas the form, if you did it on the submit, it would have all of the data.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so if we just added this on click on the button, okay, so that's just listening for the button to be clicked. I'm not sure that this gets fired when you hit return. Oh, it does get fired. Okay. Well, because that we don't have that working yet. Because this is the only button in the form, if we hit enter in one of the other fields, then this button's click event gets fired. Typically, you'd want to put this on. You'd want to put this on the form. So whatever caused, whether it was a button click or any other event, whatever caused the form to be submitted, this is what you would want fired. That was a long way of saying, in general, like the thing you want is not just that particular button is clicked, but that anything in the form causes the submission. So that's why we have the on submit. And then we use scope.event to pass it the click event or submit event or whatever it is. And then I already did it in the form. So you'll notice that I'm stuck on this welcome screen. And that's because whenever this re-renders, it's making it's accessing this session promise property. It's making this Ajax call to get the session. And then we haven't logged out, so it's always returning the session. And that's why we're stuck on this screen. That was good. Who has questions? Yeah.
How does the scope object work?
Yeah, so scope is, just give like a really quick answer to that. So in the guide, I link to the scope.event. So essentially, scope is this special object that has references to different things that you would want in the template. So like scope.event is like when there's an event fired, it's that. There's like .element. So if we did scope.element here, that would refer to the form element. If we did scope.index inside of a loop, it would refer to whatever the index is in the loop. Scope.filename refers to the templates, like whatever file you're in. There's a bunch of different properties. So that's basically how the scope.event works.
So it's kind of storing contextual information.
Yeah, stuff that isn't necessarily that like isn't an element that you can just put attributes on. That's why it's called scope, for lack of a better term. Good question. Any others? No? Okay, cool. Let's make the, oh, I won't close this. I'm going to, so as always, gonna copy and replace everything that I have so we're all on the same page. Was this different? Okay, so the answer was a little bit different. So here we got the user, so this post request, it responds back with the user. So in this example, we just return an object that has the user information. That was different from what I did, where I like stored the email. This is better. Okay, cool. So now that we're forever logged in, let's build a logout button. Let's like actually make this button work. So when the logout button is clicked, we want to make a delete request to /API/session, and then we want to update the session promise property to have a rejected value. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, before we used the .then and we returned something to set the value. Another thing that we can do is we can return promise.reject with an object. Or we can return another promise, and then whatever, then this result promise is going to be whatever is returned in the last .then function. So this is how we can say, like, okay, source is a promise that succeeds, and then we return a promise that rejects, and that means this results promise is going to reject, and that's what the .catch is. There's .then for success, .catch for failures. So this is how we can change. We can change a promise from being successful to reject, and that's what we want to do here. So we want to make a successful delete request to log out the user, and then we want to set session promise to something that's rejected. Why do we do that? For this line, right? If session promise, if we make the delete call to delete the session, we got to update session promise so that this returns false. And that's why we want to set session promise to a promise that is rejected. That was a lot of words. What questions? Can I answer questions about that? Okay, I'll give you guys a few minutes to hack on this. This is a slightly shorter section because we just got to wire up the button to make a delete request and then update session promise to the rejected value. Feel free to raise your hands if you have any questions. How's everyone feeling? Who wants to get me started in a solution?
I have a question.
Answer.
Will scope.event always be on-click event?
We want, yeah. So for this, we always want the like on-click event for attaching that to like a link or a button. We'll use on-click. Yes. Did that answer your question?
Because you always put on-click on the div, like div on-click and then scope.event.
Oh, okay. So the scope.event, that's only if you need that like that DOM event that's being generated. Then you can access scope.event. So if you don't, like in our last example, we called event.preventDefault in our view model, and that's why we passed in scope.event. But if we didn't need to do that, then we wouldn't have to use scope.event. Did that make a little more sense?
When will we use scope.event instead of on-click?
So you always have the like on-click or the on::click. You always have that. And then if you need the DOM event is when you use scope.event. So it's not one or the other. It's you always have the on click, and then if you need the event, you can access it.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. Who wants to get me started? Don't want to go down there yet.
You can make a logout function within the model.
All right, let's do it. Well, I'm just going to add it at the top. Okay, so we want logout. It's going to be a function. In here, what do we want to do? Yeah, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to copy from our sign up. We'll copy and then change it. Okay. So we're still going to do the session. The this.session promise is equal to what gets returned here. We're going to do a delete to API/session. Is this right? Okay, cool. We don't need any data. It's just the delete request, no body. In here, we don't care about the response. The .then only gets called if it's successful. That's all we care about. And then we're going to return a rejected promise. So we're going to say promise dot reject or rejected. Reject. Okay. Promise dot reject. We could put whatever we want in here. We could. I think the example says like message unauthorized or something like that. So this means the session promise, after it successfully deletes the session, will then be a rejected promise. Which means, so when we click this, oh, we need to make that happen. So let's add on logout, we'll do on click. We'll call this.logout. So when we click the logout, this function will run. It'll make the delete request. Then session promise will be set to this rejected promise, which means our view will be updated, right? Session promise.value will be no more. It'll switch to the sign up page. Let's see if we got it right. Sweet, good team. We did it. Cool, any questions? Yeah. Okay, I know we're running a little bit late. We'll go through one more section. We said this would be a sign up and login form. Let's build the login form. So I think this is most of the same things that we've learned already. As always, I'm gonna replace the JavaScript. So login form. So in the guide, I've put all of the like plain HTML. You'll notice there are no bindings. You guys know how to add the input bindings. You know how to add the on submit to the form. You know how to add a click event to the sign up button. You guys know how to do all of that. Why is this formatted weird? Okay, can I bump it up a little bit more? Okay. So what we want is we want the user to be able to switch between the sign in and the sign up and the login forms. We're going to create a page property in our view model that should always either be sign up or login. So if the page is sign up, obviously we want to show the sign up form, vice versa. Then we want to implement the login forms functionality. So when the person clicks on login, we'll send a, I think, post. Yeah, we'll send a post to API session, and then we'll update session promise with that value. What do we need to know? Okay, so there are two things. Okay, so one thing is that we can, in stash, we can check if a value is equal to another value. So we can use the EQ helper for that. Just takes the two arguments, the first thing and the second thing that we want to check. This is going to be helpful because we want to show either the sign up or the login form. And then our last thing is we can set a property within an event handler. So instead of calling a function in our view model that sets a property, we can just do it in the template like this. So we can do onClick, and then in here, just like JavaScript, like this dot a property equals a value for a string or what have you. Cool. I'll let you guys take a few minutes. Anyone feel like they're starting to come to a solution? Getting there? We'll go through it together. I feel bad that we're definitely running long. Who wants to get me started? Step one.
We can make the property page within the view model.
Okay, let's do that. So I'm going to do this stuff at the top. Just make it easier. Page property. Okay. For this one, we can use the default behavior that we were using before to either have the default be either login or sign up. What should we make it be?
Default is sign up.
Sure. Okay. So you'll notice, so before we were using the default behavior like this, where we were defining a function, there's also a shorthand for this. If all you're doing is returning a string, you can just say default and then whatever the string is instead of a function. Okay, what's next?
And we can make that conditional equal.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we want to do, so essentially what we want to do is we want to have, if this.page is equal to login, we want to do one thing. And then if it's equal to sign up, or if it's really, there's only login or sign up. So if this.page is login, we want to show the login form. I'm going to copy this and put it in here. And then, I'm going to indent it. And then I'm going to cut the sign up form that we had, put it in the else. Okay, so now this.page is login. We'll get this form or the sign up form. Cool. What's next? We have a couple of different options. I'm going to say here, let's add the click events. So this.page, we're going to change it to login when the login link gets clicked, or on the sign up link, we'll say this.page is sign up. So now we should be able to switch between the two. Awesome, and we can. So when the click event fires, we set the view model property. And that's how we can switch between the two. Next, we can start to wire up the login form. So we can do, that is the sign up form. So we can do the same thing that we did in the sign up form. So value to this.email, and then value to this.password. And then we'll have the same event listener. So on submit, we'll do this.login. And then we'll want to do the same prevent default. So we'll pass in scope.event. And then our last thing, I think our last thing, is to create the logout or the login function. So what are we going to do inside here?
In the event and then do prevent default and add Ajax.
Good call. Event.prevent default. And then can we steal some code from maybe sign up? Could have just copied and pasted that. Let's steal some code. Okay, so we're gonna do this.session promise, Ajax call. This time we're gonna do a post to session. We're still gonna send the email and the password. Is that it? Is there anything else?
Is set the data is set as an object user and then it's passed in or set those email.
Say that again, sorry.
The Yeah, data in line 103.
So this should actually be user. Okay. Gotcha. Cool. Anything else? Let's see if this works. All right, so sign up. We should be able to fill this out. And then, so that's storing in our local storage, the user info and the session. When we click on log out, that's deleting the session, but not the user. We can switch to the login page. Then we should be able to put in the same credentials and get logged in. Sweet. First try, that rarely happens. Okay, cool. So you probably noticed in this login form, there's the error message that's in our template. I'll leave that as an exercise up to you guys to do on your own. Essentially, for this one, you'd only want to show the error message if an error came back from the API. So yeah, feel free to do that on your own. I want to thank you guys for coming. I hope this was interesting, that you guys learned something. We host these about every 6 weeks. So we'll be back. Holidays are an awkward time, so we'll either do one like right before the other holidays or right after New Year's. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. Everyone who's lasted through the live stream, thanks for watching. And we'll be back in some number of weeks. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.